Hello out there in SIGT land and the rest of YouTube. This is Randy again. This is not a review. This is actually something I posted on the Facebook group, Southern Gun Talk. And today I'm going to talk about a little history of mine. This rifle is the one that kind of got me started into shooting, seeing that was the very first rifle I ever shot. And here it is. This is a Remington Model 34. I guess I didn't realize it at the time, and at the time that I first fired this gun, it didn't have this scope on it or anything else like that. I was just later on in life, I was wanting to get more accurate shots at longer distance, so I had somebody put a scope on this. So the magazine here is a tube-fed magazine. You pull out the rod here, and you can see the porthole right there. See how I pull it out, push it back in, and it's got a little plunger. You can see the brass part, and then the plunger comes after it. And it's a self-contained captured plunger that basically holds. You stack the rounds in, and I'm not going to load it right now, but you would stack them in facing forward, just like that. The tube pushes around it, but it holds 15 in the magazine, 16 if you have one in the chamber. This is what they call a 22 long, short, basically any 22 besides Magnum, you know, the longer the shorts or anything, it will fire. The quiet ones, it doesn't matter because it's bolt action, you know. And the other thing that is pretty neat about this bolt action rifle is it has this magazine bolt lifter, and I'll show you. You open it up, it's not a, but it's activated by the bolt, and it's a carriage system that lifts the 22 up into place. And then there's a little follower that helps push. When you push it closed, it'll follow that round and then chamber that round. So you pull back all the way, and that actually helps eject the shells too. It's a pretty neat little thing. Now, as far as the history goes and why this rifle got me started into firearms, I am a child of the 80s, 100%. I enjoyed the war movies. I enjoyed Commando and Chuck Norris and all that stuff, and was just a huge fan. Later on in life, I started realizing exactly, you know, what firearms do, you know, what they can do, that type of stuff, and was really intrigued by it. But that's what kind of got me wanting to shoot. This right here was my grandfather's rifle. Now, there was an exact same rifle as this in his collection, and I didn't know it at the time, but this rifle here I know was the one that I took because it has the darker finish on it, or I shot. The first one I shot because it has the darker finish on it. And to make the story more interesting is I actually took this rifle up with me to Wisconsin, and on my own, I was 16 at the time, first driving, took the rifle, just wanted to shoot it, took it up there. Huge no-no. I would never ever recommend anybody taking a rifle without anybody's permission or knowing. But took it out to a farm, fired it, put it back. When I was done, nobody knew the wiser of the difference. Later on in life, my grandfather was getting old and senile and lived in the same house as us. We lived in the 2-flat in the Chicago area, and I knew that nobody was going to, you know, respect or handle the rifle as well as I was, so I actually ended up taking it with me down to college. Now, later on, my grandfather passed on. One of my uncles was inquiring about some of the firearms and knew how many they had, and I told him yes, I took it with me, and he wasn't upset or anything like that because none of the family were shooters at all. So I ended up inheriting the rest of his collection, which was another rifle, the exact same as this one, and this rifle that I had since put a a scope mount on and had sighted in for a scope, and a shotgun, a single stage shotgun, a side-by-side shotgun, and a Winchester rifle. I ended up hitting hard times soon after college, like many people do, and not having a solid career or anything like that. Couldn't afford to keep all these guns and ended up selling them off one by one. Some of them I just had no interest in, and they didn't mean anything, but the 34 I have here meant a lot to me. I ended up actually selling this one too, but it was to somebody I knew, and with the promise that someday I could come back and pick it back up. Which the other part of that story is he was a great customer of mine for my construction company. When I hit hard times, he bought this from me, and I asked him when it was time to come sell it back, and he says, well, to make this interesting, I want you to find a certain rifle for me, and it was a 22 from his childhood. He knew the history and the story of this, and he says, you need to purchase that rifle for me, and we can trade it like that. Well, his rifle purchase was a lot more expensive than mine, and he was pretty honorable about it. He traded me the value difference of the two. I ended up finding him one down in Missouri, just like he had. I don't even remember the model number of that one, but I ended up getting this rifle back and swore never to sell it again, because it was the first rifle I took out and used. The other interesting history of this rifle is I remember me saying there was a duplicate of it that my grandfather had. Well, one had a lighter stock and one had the darker stock. After I inherited all the guns and some time passed, not knowing any history of these firearms, my uncle was telling me a story about how my grandfather had a cousin, and they both went out hunting together a lot, and that's why they went and bought the exact same duplicate rifle. I'm imagining they purchased these new, and these were in production from, the mid-30s, I think it was, 30 to 36, 33 to 36 or something like that, so there wasn't a huge production run on them, years on them, but there was quite a few produced in those years. So I imagine they went out, bought these rifles at the store, and went squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting or whatever they hunted back then. My mom also told me a story when I was a kid, and never put two and two together until much later years, that she was deathly afraid of guns because one of the family was killed by a gun. Well, it always was, he was shot by a gun, that's why I don't like guns. Later on, after I had sold off most of the collection and kept this rifle, my uncle told me the story of his cousin that he would go hunting with, killed himself with one of the 34s. Like I said, there was two. One was my grandfather and one was his. After he killed himself with the 34, my grandfather took it and kept it with his collection. Now, the reason why he killed himself was I found out later on that he had a disease. Something was wrong where fluid was building up in his legs, and in a matter of time, so to say, he would just deteriorate to the point to where nobody could help him, and he was going to die anyway. So instead of going through the pain and torture of this fluid building up and eventually getting to his heart and killing him, he took his own life. So I don't think that's a dishonorable thing to do. I mean, to be tortured most of your life, or the last of your life, and then finally having to die anyways and succumb to this, because at the time nobody had a cure for this. I don't know the name of the disease, so maybe somebody out there will be like, oh, Randy, it's such and such, and yes, we know all about it. But so bringing back to the 34 here, the thing about it is I always know in my mind there is a 50% chance that this rifle here could be the one that my grandfather's cousin shot himself with. I don't know if it means anything to me other than the fact that it's a pretty interesting story, family heritage and history and that type of stuff. And this was the rifle that I took when I was a kid and stowed away in my car and went to the farm and shot for the very first time, and kind of got my obsession, I should say, with firearms off to a kickstart. and also teaching myself how to shoot and how to maintain things. One of the interesting things that my grandfather did, he would pull these out every once in a while. I never ended up going to shoot with him. He was much too old, or there was too many other women in our lives that convinced him not to take me shooting or whatever. But one of the things, he would bring them out every once in a while and tell me things about them. He taught me a trick, and I'll show you that trick here in a second. Let me get a couple things together. Okay, so my grandfather, a little history on him. He was a machinist. He worked for Hot Point during the war. He lost an appendix and couldn't really fight, and pretty much that was it. So I don't think grandfather knew a lot about firearms as I do now, or as much as I do now. But he was teaching me about cleaning firearms, which was kind of neat. He showed me the brushes and the cleaners and that type of stuff, and we clean these weapons. And one of the things he showed me is to take a little white piece of paper, and when you put the little white piece of paper down there, it has something to reflect on, and you can actually see down the barrel very well, because the reflection from the paper will show the light, and shoot it down the barrel. So without bore lights and stuff, or modern tools that we have now, it was an interesting way for him to show me how to look down the bore and add more light to it, because I don't think grandfather knew that if you took the safety off, pulled the trigger, the bolt would come out. I mean, that would have saved a lot of trouble. He could have put a flashlight, he could have looked down it, stared at a light, that type of stuff, and we would have been off and running. But it was still an interesting trick that my grandfather showed me, until much later on, when I learned about bolt action rifles. It was that simple to disassemble them. I thought it was pretty easy, and actually there you can actually see the disassembly of it. So that is the 22 long rifle, 22 short, Remington Model 34, a little bit of Randy's family heritage and history. Thank you for watching, and this is Randy with SIGT signing out.